10. Jack Edge, that's a fucking good start. At least you can count to 10. Mr. Hawke, today you were referred to as being a concerned Australian by legacy. Just how concerned are you with industrial relations in this country at the present time?
I'm very concerned. I think that for a country which has such tremendous resources and opportunities, one of the things which is holding us back in the proper development and the equitable sharing of those is significantly less than adequate industrial relations situation. And what concerns me following that, therefore, is that the Prime Minister, and in this state the Premier of Victoria, seem intent in the political situation with which they are confronted in making a political football out of industrial relations. Let's talk about bringing in legislation to impose further penalties on trade unions. Look, unions are at fault, and a lot of problems there, but that's not where the whole problem is. There are problems as far as government's attitudes and employers are concerned. So the real thing is to acknowledge that we've got an industrial relations system which is not functioning very well, and that we ought to not try and make a political plaything out of it, but to bring the parties together, try and inform them of just where we are economically, what are the challenges, what are the opportunities, what are the limits to aspirations of what can be achieved. If we get people together and make them understand that in a spirit of cooperation, we'd do very, very much better.
So if you were in the driver's seat, just exactly what would you do?
If I were in this hypothetical situation which you picture, the first thing I would do would be to call the parties together, not for a half a day or a day. I'd bring all the major groupings together, that is the unions, the employers, the states and the Commonwealth, and have them there for a week. And have inputs from Reserve Bank, Treasury, IAC, anyone who is well placed to let people know what are the dimensions of the economic problems confronting us, what are the reasonable expectations that people can have about protecting and improving their position, whether it's unions or employers, so that even if you couldn't get absolute consensus, which would be too much to hope for, at least you'd get a closer degree of understanding about where we were and what was possible. Now I'm sure if that was done, we'd go a long, long way to having a more sensible industrial relations situation.
Just turning to another issue, it's been said that Mr. Peacock will possibly make a run for the Liberal leadership this year. Could the same be said of Bob Hawke against Mr. Hayden?
Well, I'm sure people will say it, but the saying of it doesn't really create a situation. I say no more and no less than this, and I've said it consistently. If the time comes when my party believes that it would be appropriate for me to lead it, I would like to do so.
What about if Mr. Hayden doesn't do famously in the low by-election?
As a well-known forerunner and predecessor of mine in the Labor Party has said, that's a hypothetical question.
Thank you.
And rolling now. I'm not allowed to talk now. No. You can give it a help.
No, just I'll turn away and yes, thank you. Thank you. 3 bags full.
Thank you, that's more than enough. Okay, Dick, you happy with that?
Yep.
You happy with that? That's funny. Okay, well, we must do it.
You right?
Yep.
Mr. Hawke, if you were in the driver's seat now, what would you do?
I'd relight it. Well, now.
Mr. Hawke, if you were on the driver's seat, what would you do? Mr. Hawke, if Mr. Hayden doesn't fare too well in the by-election in Low, will you make a Labor... Sorry, I'll start that again. Mr. Hawke, if Mr. Hayden doesn't fare...
John Cameron's guest is Kevin Jacker, Commonwealth Banking Corporation.
At the outset, sincerely thank the organisation, and particularly in light of the very brief visit I've had round your headquarters here today. It is a fundamental concern for the welfare of others less fortunate than yourselves. I believe that that sense of concern is to be applauded, and I hope what I want to say, but I can assure you, if you hear me through, that would not be a balanced picture of these thoughts that I want to leave with you. To ask yourself this question, according to are quite legitimately open to criticism in many of the things that they have done. Neither when I was President of the Australian Council of Trade Unions or since that time have I ever sought to suggest that the trade unions make no mistakes, or even that they make no serious mistakes. For indeed, the truth is far from that. But I do want to suggest to you today that if we are going to talk sensibly and hopefully with some constructive purpose about responsibility in industry and some of the wider issues to which such a consideration should lead, then we do need to talk about these things with a broader perspective. Let me, and they do, I suppose in all of our minds we have quite clear pictures of the extent and the ravages of industrial disease and health hazards which were prevalent in earlier times. But I'm not so sure that our society is anywhere near as aware of the dimension of the actual and potential risks that are taken by working men and women in these days. And without in any sense being exhaustive about the range of problems and dangers involved, comprehension of the dimension of the risks that are an issue. A tragic case occurred here in this state at the end of September of last year. 2 teenage boys died after being overcome by, and within minutes he was unconscious. His mate climbed in to help, and he was soon unconscious as well. They lay there for about 40 minutes before they were found and an ambulance was called, but it was too late, and within 48 hours the 2 boys were diagnosed as having cerebral brain death. That the problem about responsibility in industry is solely the blame of employers, or solely the blame of the Fraser government, or the Rand government, or the Thompson government. Because if you think you've exhausted your intellectual and social responsibility by engaging in that sort of unilateral blame allocation, then with respect, I think any of us who do that are rather inadequate.